What's going on, everybody? My name is Nick.
And my name is Dave.
And this is The Deep Dive. And we are in week 2 of our new series called Reset. And Dave, what are we talking about today?
Today we are talking about bicycles, and we're talking about 5 ingredients for a successful reset.
Bicycles and 5 ingredients. All right, that sounds fun. Let's get into it.
All righty.
Well, Dave, I feel sad on this Monday. The Braves had a very rough weekend.
They did.
Against the Mets.
Yeah.
And I'm not recovering well.
Well, it's a long season, and
It
just
is.
peaking right. They're going to be in the playoffs. They're going to be in the hunt.
We hope so.
Yeah. They
Yeah.
just got to peak at the right time.
That's right.
There's
That's right.
still
It's all
time.
about the right time. Thank you.
It's not over. It's not like SEC football. If you lose one game and then you go down 10 in the rankings.
That's a good point.
Yeah,
That
they'll
is
be
a good-
okay.
They'll be all right.
They're still
Thanks
good.
for that. That's a good encouragement for a
past-
hard-feeling Braves fan.
I'm a pastor. I was giving you some sort of pastoral.
Okay, right
guidance
on.
there.
Very cool. Very
Yeah.
cool. Well, Dave, like we said, we're in week 2 of this reset series.
Are we going to say anything about these?
Oh yeah, we are unofficially sponsored. It's not a real sponsorship, but Circle of Friends was gracious enough to donate us some coffee cups so that we can
Stop using styrofoam cups.
stop using styrofoam
Yeah.
cups, which is the bane of our production team's existence. But we like to drink stuff while we're on set.
They look nice.
They do look nice. And Circle of Friends is a great ministry, and we appreciate all that they're doing in our community for our special needs and disabled community that's out there. They're really doing a lot of good work to help provide eventually, hopefully, some housing and stuff for them. But right now, it's good employment opportunities and
Outstanding
job
ministry.
skills. It's really cool.
And they have good coffee.
And they have good coffee.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep. Well, why don't we jump into this the series and talk to us about it?
Okay, so we started last week with a series kind of taking advantage of the time of year it is, which is sort of a reset season. As
sure.
school gets started back, a lot of people begin to reestablish some habits or start some habits that they hope to carry on to get their lives back in order.
Yeah, because
And
summer was a natural break kind of for a lot
Sure.
of people from a normal routine, and now it's kind of getting back into it.
Right. And so, I've sort of pushed the idea that we're really kind of in need of a hard reset, to use that metaphor with resetting your modem, that, it feels like we came back from COVID and some other things that have sort of happened the last couple of years that have kind of got us discombobulated. And now it's time for a hard reset to really get things going well. And so we began that last week, and so we continue with that this week. And I pulled in a bicycle as a metaphor this week, and with the idea, as I've started, part of my reset, personal reset, is doing more exercise. So I've been riding my bike, and the way my brain works, I just thought, wow, this is a good little illustration here. Everybody knows what a bicycle wheel is, a tire, and so the different parts of the bicycle wheel that you need, but they all turn on a hub. You got these spokes coming out of it, but it all needs to turn on a hub.
Yep.
And so the idea is that you put your life of faith or put Jesus in the center, a better way of putting it maybe, that when you do that, when you get that center right, then all the other spokes, whether they be, your education or your mental health or your family relationships, all those other things that are important in life, that we get them in order. And so, that's kind of where we began, and we got back into the Old Testament book of Haggai, which is the biblical example that we're tracking along as we're talking about reset.
Right.
And we talked about, one of the conversations that we've had is that, this is sort of a holistic Bible study.
Yeah.
Rather than a verse-by-verse Bible study, we're taking a story that comes from a Bible and really trying to apply it to everyday life.
Yeah.
Right. And so that was a community of faith, the Israelites, that had returned from being exiled in Babylon to Jerusalem and reset every part of their life, but things weren't going that well for them. And Haggai comes on the scene as a prophet and says, well, here's why. You haven't rebuilt the temple. And it's been 17 years. And by the way, you have the money to do it too as well. So
There's no excuse.
There's no excuse. What's the holdup? And so we're using that. And I went a little bit deeper into the text this week. We did the first few verses last week and went on to the point where they kind of heard the message. And from that sort of conversation that Haggai and their response, the leaders and Israelites had, kind of came up with 5 ingredients or conditions for what I call a successful reset. And so, we can kind of unpack those because I think they're great talking points.
Yeah, for sure.
And my first point was that you have to bring yourself to the reset. Only you can do it.
Yeah.
If you're going to if your life is not going great and you're trying to figure out why, first of all, going back to the bicycle example, you can't just make Jesus and your life of faith be one of the spokes on the bike. I would say, I would challenge you that in order for your life to go well and to live the abundant good life that God wants us to have, Christ needs to be the center of that. And all the other things then are kind of held in tension and in place with that at the center. And so, but you have to make that decision. Only individual, I have to make that decision.
Yeah.
I can't make it for you. You can't make it for me.
Yeah.
You're a small group leader, your Sunday school leader, the preacher, your spouse. No one, you have to individually make that commitment to reset. So that was the starting place. And so, any insights into that?
Well,
Just
I was
experiences?
just kind of sitting here listening and just recognizing that it does really start with us. And actually, I love the metaphor you used with the wheel. And I was thinking, I kind of took it a step further in my head as I was talking about it, because your kind of point was that that center component, that hub, is where Jesus and everything kind of spreads out from it. And I kind of took it further because I was like, yeah, because if that was removed, everything on that wheel now is in a flux state. It's kind of moving, and as it doesn't quite work as it should. So having that hub there that creates the tension and builds the tension, and from Jesus into life, Jesus into family, Jesus into hobbies or whatever, you have to have that middle hub so it creates the tension and it creates the wheel to work well together, which is kind of an abundant life is kind of the idea. But when we talk about us, this really takes a step. If we're truly thinking about reset, we have to slow down and say, what are we resetting from? What is it that I want to reset in my life, and say, this is where I want to bring God more into it. And I think that's individual. And that is, it's going to be different for you to reset your life than it would be for me to reset my life, because we're in totally different places of life. We have different circumstances pouring into whatever we're at, So it has to be an individual thing. Not that you can't bring somebody along to help you be a part of it, but you have to make that decision first to say, I recognize the need for reset. I recognize a place for reorder. How can I do that? You know what I mean? So I think that's important.
Yeah, it does, particularly for adult people. I think it does come down to that decision. I have, some senior adult folks that are talking about getting their children back in church. Their children are grown-up adults. And, that's going to be really hard to get them back to the church. It's going to take them coming to the place of wanting to know that and needing a reset in their life. It's really kind of hard.
Yeah, you can't always, at a certain point, you can't will and force things to happen. You just kind of have to show through your life and energy and, your faith.
And I do absolutely agree with you. We're all at different parts of the journey.
Yeah.
And so wherever we are, and our resets may look different, how that comes about. I do think that there's some common things that we can group around what we need in a reset, And so actually, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but next week as we look at resetting discipleship, I think we'll see some of those common categories that, there's an individual flow in that, but there's some common things that every one of us as followers of Jesus Christ need to have in our lives. And so that'll be next week. So let's look ahead on this one. So the second ingredient that I had in there is that there is an element of humility, I think. And part of it that only the individual can make for himself is also the individual has to come to a part of humility. They can't handle life on their own the way that it's been going.
Yeah.
We sometimes feel like, well, I know what's best for me. And I think it's understanding that, maybe we don't. maybe we need to turn to God. Maybe we need to turn to the church and to a small group of folks that can help us with our lives, our spiritual lives, and kind of the holistic understanding beyond that of how the Bible can nurture every part of our life and faith.
Yeah, I think this is a good thing to think about when you talk about humility, especially here in America. And we might have talked a little bit about this before, but just it's hard to recognize the things that we need in America because we have so much. And I think we need to make sure to check, and I love how you said spiritual self, because there are still needs that we have in our spiritual life that, it might not be AC, it might not be clothes, it might not be food. For some people in the world it is, but for us here right now, where do we need God to show up and to admit that we need it? I think especially in things like anxiety and depression and focus and stuff like that, where we kind of are starting to become all over the place as a society, like to be able to say, God, I need you in these aspects and facets of my life, as opposed to I just have to get through this myself, and I have to go internal with this because I don't want anybody to change their view of me. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But to bring God into that, I think that's important to recognize that need for God.
Yeah, 100%. And so you must bring you.
Yeah.
It's an individual decision. You've got to decide, I need a reset.
Yeah.
There is this humility to understand that, it hasn't been going well.
Sure.
I need God. I need a reset in my life. So there's this humbling part of it that I think is sort of a natural part. And then what we read in Haggai, we hear the phrase, which is a lot in the Bible, particularly in the Old Testament, the fear of the Lord. The fear of the Lord is really what drove them to this decision. And we talked about yesterday, or on Sunday when I preached this, is that the fear of the Lord, we can interpret that as being like we're afraid of God. We're afraid God's going to stomp on us or something. But it really, a better interpretation of that is just to be inspired by the awesomeness of God. Mm-hmm. And part of that is just fear of how big and powerful God is.
Yeah.
But not in a way that we feel afraid, but just the inspired, that will inspire us to trust Him more, to love Him more, to want to get connected to that power more.
Yeah.
That to stand in awe of God, the fear of the Lord. When we get to that point, it's like, that's got to be my center, because that is a pretty freaking powerful center.
Yeah.
That's what I want in my life. That is the fear and the awe of God. So, getting to that point, I think is another important part of a reset.
Yeah, I've heard somebody describe it as like having a great respect for, like when you see it, it's undeniable. You know what I mean? As opposed to the fear. And I think that's important because when I read fear the first time, I'm like, I need to be scared of God, but love God. That's a weird distinguishment. But yeah, no, I think it's like tapping into a central core of power.
Yeah, but that sort of fear, the biblical sense of fear, I think it's something that maybe as parents we can kind of relate to. Have you ever been afraid, would say like, how much you love your children or how much you love your spouse? And there's an element of fear in that. It's like I have never loved anything so much and wanted so much for them to have everything, to have life and love and all that kind of stuff. And there's this sense of almost being afraid of how much you love it.
There's a lot of it feels like a fear because I don't want to screw these kids up. I want them to have the best and abundant life. I want to set them up for success. So you start kind of going back on yourself almost and doubting those things. Yeah, I feel that.
Yeah, it is. Almost to driving you to tears of how much you see your child and you love them so much.
Yeah.
So, I think people who know that sort of sense. And so I think that's probably a sermon for another time. But to talk about the fear of the Lord and the various elements that I think we as human beings can have that can help us maybe get more in tune of what that means, other than just literally being afraid and trying to run for shelter because we're scared.
Yeah.
That's not what it is.
Right.
We want to run towards God. And then the other, a couple of things kind of go together. The other 2 points that I made. One was a reset requires hearing. and hearing and then having action after the hearing.
Yeah.
Because you can hear something and you can know something and still not take action on it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
I mean, that was Noah, right? Or Jonah, sorry.
Right.
Jonah. Like, God called to do something, and he was like, I'm good.
yeah, the way. But yeah, I mean, God is speaking to us. We may know, maybe intellectually have some sort of assent to it, but the fact that it's moving to do something. I think also of like people, or including myself, who would say, "Oh, that was a really inspiring sermon, or really inspiring worship service, or that song really inspired me." Inspired you to do what?
Yeah.
Because inspire should be beyond, it just made me have, had chill bumps, because it was so, that's just an emotion that if it doesn't lead to action, have we really heard?
Yeah.
It might have caused our heart to be a little bit faster and maybe to, get a little teary-eyed or whatever. But did it lead us to do some action that really changed our lives, made our lives better, made us respond in action that would make us more Christ-like, or do things more like Christ would do, that would make the world a better place and more like God's kingdom.
Yeah.
And so that's the kind of action that I'm talking about when I'm saying that's part of a hard reset. And so with the people in Haggai's time, they're being moved by God, their fear of the Lord, the awesome that moved them. They heard and responded in action by beginning to rebuild the temple.
So when you talk about hearing God, what are I know there's not like firm steps, right? Like you can't say, well, if you play this music at this amount of time and read your Bible for this amount of time, you'll hear. But what are some ways that are there any like practical ways to kind of help people hear from God more?
Yes. So many to talk about. I mean,
maybe a top three or something like that.
One thing I think about, looking at God's word, and not in the sense of like opening up the word and like, putting your finger down, like, what is it saying? We've talked about that before. But, studying, there's a biblical practice called Lectio Divina, which is really prayerfully taking a section of the Bible and reading it and meditating and letting it speak to you. And so there are certain disciplines that we can bring to our study of Scripture that I think can hear from God. Hear from God. But I think beyond that, I think it's just kind of a spiritual awareness to be looking and hearing, because I think God is speaking to us a lot. We're just not listening, or we're not in a position to hear God.
And I think that's an important point, is that sometimes we're not in a position to, because we are consistently bombarded with exterior things trying to grab attention, whether it's a phone or a TV or kids or job or this, any list of things that you can think of. Like, we're being kind of assaulted almost in terms of like what our mind is consistently going through. So to like find a spot that's quiet and still, that you can solely kind of focus in on your reading and your praying, and that meditational spot, I think is so key.
Yeah, I think if you're seeking God, you will find God.
Yeah.
And looking at places like reading about contemplative kind of Christianity and Christian practices, reading things by, for example, somebody like Thomas Merton, and maybe even just looking at the disciplines that he used to hear from God, to find that closeness and that connection. And so I do think we live in an age of quick fix, that we want the 3 bullet points that are going to instantaneously change our lives and make us, suddenly be able to, hear God audibly, from some sort of podcast or something.
Sure.
But, it doesn't exactly work like that. But I think God is around and inspires and speaks to us in ways. I used one as an example in church, because it had just happened to that morning.
Yeah.
As I was driving in and just praying, about the service and about the day, and trying to get things in my mind around that. And I looked up, and every sunrise is different, but there's just this beautiful sunrise, and it was like, never heard it audibly, but it was as if God was like putting his hand on me and saying, yeah, I got you. I'm here. And so, it's just like God is, I think, trying to speak to us a lot more than we're trying to listen a lot of times.
And I'm not one that is overly like, look for the signs. I dated a girl one time who broke up with me because she saw a sign or something like that told her to break up, and maybe I just have a vendetta against that type, like written out. Like you see somebody's name in the sky and you're like, oh, that's it. I got to change everything. But rainbows have a significant like thing in my like that show up. They show up in places where I need affirmation.
Right.
And we just got sent a picture. A local photographer in our community drove by our church as there was a rainbow after one of the storms we had this past week, and took this beautiful picture of the church with the rainbow behind it. And
it was beautiful.
And it was so just kind of affirming for some of the stuff that we're doing and working in. Not that I was down on it, but it was more of like, just like. Because when you work at a church, you see all the great things, and you're like, man, there's so much more we could be doing. You know what I mean? So kind of having some of the mentality, but it's shown up at other times. So I think in some ways, finding God in nature spaces, but also I'm not saying that every time you see a rainbow, he's affirming you for something, but it just seems like that has been something for me.
Yeah, and I hear both of those things. I mean, seeing those things, and particularly something like a rainbow, which has got such deep symbolism, even back to God's symbol of promise from the Bible. But I also hear you can be led by sort of in almost a superstitious way. It's about the same reason that people might read their horoscope or whatever. Not to be always chasing that. But I think there's a cynical side of us that can push too much of that away as well.
Sure.
And I think God does use little things like that to affirm relationships that we're going in.
But I think being in the Word and knowing the practices of God and knowing God helps you see that when that's what God's given you.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean? It helps you understand it better.
Yeah, and yesterday we had Holy Communion.
Yeah,
and that is one of the places and one that the symbols that are there. Yeah. And our understanding of the sacrament of what's taking place in there. God does reveal God's self through the sacraments in just so many ways that sort of define words. That go beyond definition.
Yeah.
So God is speaking. So that was, those were the sort of the five things that, looking at the people in Haggai's time, sort of the conditions that they had, that suddenly, then they acted upon it to begin a reset.
Right.
And so I think there's some parallels that we can draw for ourselves. And then we'll next week, as we get into a little bit deeper in Haggai and go into chapter 2, we will see them start to rebuild the temple and some of the things they were up against that, and some interesting things ahead of us with this study. Next week we're going to be looking at discipleship, how we renew our life with Jesus, for Jesus, and through Jesus. Yeah, and so that'll be.
And I want to say one last thing about action, and I think it kind of leads into next week a little bit. Is that when you're called into action. Mm-hmm. That does not mean you're going to do everything right from the beginning. Mm-hmm. That is part of the discipleship path. Mm-hmm. But you still do it to learn. You still try things and jump out there. And I think that's important, because I know a lot of people who are like, well, I don't want to talk about Jesus, or I don't want to step too far into my bounds because I'm not 100% perfect and ready. Yeah. It's almost like they're convincing themselves that they're not good enough before they ever get going. But the discipleship path is not a class you take. It's not a time frame of like, oh, well, if you do this for 60 days, you're good to go. Like it is a lifestyle that you're gonna work into and work through. I think it's like I still mess up. Dave, do you mess up? Mm-hmm. And it's working through those things. That's part of the discipleship journey as well. And I think that is the action piece that we have to understand, is like, just because you're not going to be perfect doesn't mean you should not do it. Do it. jump in, be an active participant in your faith, and bringing God to the center. That action piece is important for all of us, and not to let the fear of failure overcome you doing action.
Yeah, what I was thinking about as you were saying that, but just I think God recognizes the effort as we are attempting to live out our life of faith in Him.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like our children, maybe when they were little, and they might draw a picture. It's like, look, Daddy, I drew a picture of you, and they made it in preschool or something. They bring it to you, and as a parent, you go, man, that is so awesome.
Yeah.
And put it on the refrigerator and all that. You don't go like, that's not so good. Looks nothing like me.
This is kind of like a Picasso here.
Where are my ears?
Yeah.
But I think God does recognize the effort. Not that we will always be drawing preschool level, portraits for that. Hopefully God wants us to grow up in our faith. But I think the effort of just taking the steps of discipleship, and we'll unpack that a little bit more next week as we go deep on that.
Well, every great artist started with a stick figure, probably at some point. You know what I mean?
Right,
you gotta start somewhere.
Yeah.
And not be discouraged. Like, I wanted to draw a bow, but it looks like a cat. You know what I mean? I don't know. That was just the first random thing that popped in my head. But anyway, we're gonna get into that next week. I think a little more. I'm excited. This has been a fun series so far. I think it's timely. It works, and I think it's something that we all need to consider, because this is actually what I've heard, like, among the congregation even. I was talking to somebody in the congregation yesterday, and I said, oh, how are you? They're like, man, we've been gone all summer. We're just trying to kind of reset and get back into a routine. And I was like, wow, it's amazing you said the word reset, because Dave's preaching about reset. You know what I mean? Like, so this is common terminology right now. So I think it's very timely.
It's that time of year that we need to be reset. And so taking advantage of that is all the things coming together, because I do feel like we're all feeling it. And for me, I'm feeling it more than I have in several years.
Sure.
That I need to get things back in order. I need a reset moment. So I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to have found Haggai. And did I tell you how it happened among Haggai?
No.
So this is one of these God moments too.
Okay.
We can close with this.
Yeah.
But it showed up on one of those devotions that, those pop-up devotions that are on your phone, every day. It comes in your email.
Yeah.
Like, and so there was just a couple things in Haggai. I completely Haggai's not one of those often sort of studied or talked about. And so it came out, like, oh yeah, there's that whole story. And so it just sort of prompted my memory. So I mean, I look at that as a God moment. People could call it a coincidence if they want, but it's kind of God incidence for me. So that's the way that God, I think, speaks to us, and so it sort of led into. I'd already kind of thought about this whole theme of reset. Right. But that would really kind of confirmed, and hey, that's a scriptural foundation for it, rather than, one of the things is to have a sermon in search of a text. Usually it's better to find a text and let the sermon flow out of it. Yeah. So Haggai's been a good template for us to walk through as we're considering reset, because this is definitely of a group of our ancestors that had to go through a reset themselves.
For sure. Well, Dave, I thank you for your insight and all this. I think that's very well said, and it's nice to know, or it's nice to hear sometimes about how God will just kind of throw some of these things at us, and we go, this is what I either need to talk about, or this is where we're kind of being pulled and prodded, and because I could see a need for this in special place in parts of my life too. You know what I mean? Like, this doesn't go over my head as a staff person. Like, this is like, I need to, and I was actually talking to, I know we need to wrap up here, but I was talking to Steve earlier today, and I said, not that I'm any professional or anything, but I feel like I've gotten to a spot in my marriage. I feel like I've gotten to a spot as a dad where I feel a little comfortable in those spaces of I can ease into what this looks like and all this stuff. Not that I'm going to mess up. I know that. But the point is that I feel this sense of reinvigoration as well to do different things. I think some of that's coming out of, I don't have this building project hanging over my head. You know what I mean? It's so I feel a need to kind of reorient some of the stuff in my world and be I need to get back to some of my roots. I need to get back to like more study. You know what I mean? So
Well, good for you, because sometimes when you can get to those spaces, we can become sort of lackadaisical and just kind of let life happen. But like, good for you for recognizing, okay, I'm comfortable now. Now it's time to take level up. Time to go up again.
Yep.
So yeah, awesome. That's great.
Well, anyway, guys, we appreciate you always watching and being here, and especially just giving us some time. And we hope that this is a meaningful time, that you don't just watch and be like, okay, I checked that off. We hope that this is adding something to what we were talking about on Sunday, but also just speaking into your life and stuff like that. And always, we encourage you to be a part of the conversation. We'd love to have some of you guys communicate and stuff. So we have an email. It's deepdive@hickoryflat.org. Check us out there, or hit us up on the website. When this is posted, drop a comment. Even if it's just like, hey, I watched and this was a cool thing you said, or I have a question about this. We'd love to have any feedback and just communicate with you guys. So like last week, I know Teresa actually posted and said she was praying for my mom, because I was talking about her lung transplant potentially coming up and all that stuff. So we look at it, we see it, and thank you for the prayers. That's always very meaningful to me. But anyway, Dave, you got anything else you want to say?
No, everybody just have a great week, and we'll be back next time.
We'll be back next time. And just in case you're watching and you are a part of the congregation here, Wednesday night programming, as this launches, will start later tonight, I guess, since you'll be watching this on Wednesday. So it starts at 6 o'clock. We got studies, kids programming, and stuff like that. Come check it out. It should be a lot of fun. Anyways, y'all have a good one. We'll take care.
God bless.